Good afternoon. Hi. It's a privilege to introduce U of M psychology professor Ashley Gearhart. Dr. Gearhart is an internationally recognized thought leader in the medical and psychological sciences. She earned a BS degree with highest honors in psychology from Michigan in 2003, as well as two master's degrees and a PhD in clinical psychology from Yale University. We welcomed her back to Ann Arbor as a U of M faculty member in 2012. Her interdisciplinary research has contributed significantly to our understanding of the cognitive, behavioral, and environmental and neurobiological underpinnings of food addiction, obesity, and disordered eating habits. While at Yale, Dr. Gearhart developed the Yale Food Addiction Scale, which has been cited more than 800 times and has been translated into more than 10 languages. She is the recipient of U of M's Henry Russel Award and Faculty Recognition Award, and her research has been featured in numerous media outlets, including ABC News, Good Morning America, The Today Show, The Wall Street Journal, and NPR. Professor Gearhart, we are honored to have you with us and look forward to learning more about your research, U of M's Food and Addiction Science and Treatment Lab, and the science behind our cravings for things like chocolate, cookies, and potato chips. Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here. Go blue. Good day. I know I should have thought that out. I do have a blue and yellow dress that I wear to almost all my speaking engagements, but I feel like people are like, does she only own one dress? So I try and mix it up every once in a while. No red dress though, no scarlet and gray. I am so thrilled to speak to you about my research that I've been doing for about 15, 20 years now. It's an interesting time to be doing work in the realm of ultra processed food. And I'll be speaking with you about the science, talking to you about the science a bit today. So, I like to start my talks by taking a step back and thinking about how we as humans create addictive substances. All addictive substances are man made. Mother Nature doesn't give us stuff that hooks us. We take something that exists in nature, a grape, a potato, a leaf, a flower, and we process it and refine it in a way that delivers intense reward hits to the brain that can hook some people to start to lose control of their intake, even if they really, really want to stop. And so I'm showing you a picture of the raw material that has made the most deadly addictive agent in American history, which is the tobacco leaf. High in nicotine, and this unprocessed form, it'll poison you. Humans are not rubbing tobacco leaves all over their bodies. It's poisonous in this form. But if you dry it and cure it and roll it and smoke it, all of a sudden it delivers this just right dose of nicotine that can stimulate you, make you feel awake, make you feel in a mood altering high that's just subtle enough that you can go about your day, but that you start to crave it and want to come back for more. Humans have been using tobacco for as long as there's been recorded history. There's evidence from cave paintings of tobacco use in rituals. And for many, many years, it wasn't a huge problem. People would get some tobacco and they'd have to hand roll it and smoke it. But at the end of the 1800s and the 1880s, technology changed and they developed the industrial cigarette roller. And all of a sudden, you could pump out thousands of very precise manufactured cigarettes every minute. So that's an opportunity for big business. This is something people like, they crave, you create it, you optimize it. Good way to make money. Well, the cigarettes that resulted from that technological advancement are not just dried tobacco rolled up. They are ultra processed cigarettes. They have more than 4,000 chemicals in every cigarette. And the majority, they have more flavor additives by weight than they actually do nicotine. They're only about 1% nicotine by weight. Sugar, cocoa, menthol, those are actually the number one ingredients. When you take this ultra processed modern version that you can make cheap, packaged, it's on every gas station shelf. It was, in all the vending machines when I was growing up. All of a sudden, you saw a 1,000% increase in cigarette smoking. And accompanying that was all the lung cancer and the emphysema and the heart disease. And it took us decades to realize how harmful it was. And even when we realized it was harmful and people started to get that message, they would try and quit and they would find that they couldn't. And it took us another couple decades to realize that that's because people were getting addicted to this substance. So, what in the heck does this have to do with food? Why am I talking to you about tobacco? Well, that reward and motivation system that cigarettes use to drive the desire was originally designed to make sure we felt motivated to get enough calories to survive. Our brain has been optimized to find things that give us a burst of energy, tasty, rewarding, memorable, and something we'll go out and seek to get. And that really was not a problem for most of human existence. Our big threat to survival was that we were going to starve to death. And so if you found sugar, which gives you a big boost of carbohydrate energy, appealing, and remembered where there were berries, and remembered there was a banana or some honey, you were more likely to survive. If you found fat appealing, like what you would get in nuts or in meat, and you would seek that out, that was amazing. That meant you were going to survive. But humans have figured out how to technologically extract those rewarding ingredients out of those natural packages and really, really concentrate them. So we can all do this, right? We can go and pick up sugar that was stripped from some beets or some cane at the grocery store. We can go get some Crisco or butter that's been really centrifuged from milk and cream to give us the most condensed version of fat. And we can make breads and cookies and cakes at home. But when most people were getting their food by, scratch cooking at home, we didn't have the levels of obesity and diet-related disease or binge eating that we have now. What happened is that we ended up with an ultra processed food supply where they took that ability to take those sugars and those fats, and we have technologically revolutionized them into these things like high fructose corn syrup and hydrogenated oils that can sit on a shelf for months and months and months. And the flavor scientists have done a fantastic job figuring out how to take chemical signatures from something like a pine tree, but make it taste like vanilla. And so you can layer these different sensory flavors that have nothing to do with the ingredients you're ingesting in your body and give you this whole unnaturally sensory high appeal of these sorts of products. And they've flooded the environment. Now the American food supply is 70% ultra-processed food. If you compare this to somewhere like Italy's 20% ultra-processed food. We lead the world in diet-related disease and obesity, and it's tightly tied to the changing nature of our food environment. So I want to tell you a little secret. This really started to go off the rails in about the late 1970s, 1980s. That's when our food environment really seemed to shift underneath us. Part of what happened is that tobacco was making so much money from their cigarettes that they were able to diversify their portfolios, and they bought up major food companies like Kraft and General Foods. Things like Lunchables and Jell-O and Capri Sun were all brought to you actually by Philip Morris. And Laura Schmidt at the University of California, San Francisco, has been able to take the archives from the tobacco industry that were acquired in response to the lawsuits, the Attorney General lawsuits, and look at the information they had about their food holdings. Because Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds were actually the biggest producers, manufacturers, and creators of ultra-processed foods from the 1980s through about the mid-2000s when they divested. So there's evidence that they took the flavor enhancers that they had been using in cigarettes and put them in things like children's sugar-sweetened beverages, like Kool-Aids and Capri Sun. They took their marketing strategies of not marketing to moms, but marketing directly to kids, like they were doing with cigarettes, and started to apply that to their ultra-processed food and beverage holdings and going after racial and ethnic minority communities aggressively. So your modern food supply has been brought to you by Big Tobacco. This is a statistical fact. And when that happened, people started to struggle to listen to their nutritional wisdom that had been honed over thousands and thousands of years and eat past their needs. And one of the reasons that I think is really interesting that I learned from Dr. Schmidt of why the tobacco industry was motivated to buy up the food companies is actually they wanted their flavor signatures. So the different flavor additives and flavor houses that you can use to make, a sugar sweetened beverage more appealing, or, it's in your flaming hot Cheetos. Those flavor enhancers are also put into cigarettes. So there's really a kind of back and forth between these substances. So I want to show you a little clip that's directly from the food industry. This is a 60 Minutes episode where they're interviewing some of those flavor scientists who are developing those signatures that go into the cigarettes and into the foods. And they're talking about how they design their products. Let me make sure this works.
The ultimate purpose is to sell more soft drinks or whatever.
That's what we're in the business of, selling flavors.
We want, a burst in the beginning and maybe a finish that doesn't linger too much so that you want more of it.
And you don't want a long linger because you're not going to eat more of it if it lingers.
But that suggests something else.
Exactly.
Which is called addiction.
Exactly.
You're trying to create an addictive taste.
It's a good word.
Or something that they want to go back for again and again.
Just to hear that a little bit is the idea of, okay, so, the goal is to get a product that people want to go back for more and more and more, right? And so that's the taste. You get a burst on the front end, but it fades, doesn't stick around very long. And so he says, it sounds like you're trying to create, an addictive taste. He's like, yes, addictive. And I love his colleague. It's like, oh no, they said the quiet part out loud, and so this is the vibe. I mean, I don't think the industry was like, man, I want to addict people. Like, I want to be the new dealer. I think it's that the technology got so good at being able to kind of hack that limbic part of our brain that seeds desire and reward. And it just crossed the Rubicon from a real food like a fruit or a vegetable into something that far more resembles the reward signature of something like a cigarette. So this is, straight from the industry's mouth. And so this question is, I'm showing you, big tobacco has been involved. They're kind of using words like addiction and trying to make people want more and more and more. How do we actually tell if something is addictive? And I have to tell you, this has been a controversy pretty much for everything. I mean, we've just gone through it with oxycodone, right? The prescription opioids. Were they addictive or not? Cigarettes, were they addictive or not? There was a whole time when they thought cocaine wasn't addictive because its withdrawal syndrome didn't look like alcohol. So that idea of trying to resolve these controversies over something, whether something's really addictive, has been hard. And one misunderstanding that I often get is this idea that we have some sort of magical brain scan we could do. And we could take a look at your brain and say, yes, that is an addictive substance. We do not have that, unfortunately, yet. What we generally have done to resolve these sorts of controversies is to look at the psychological and behavioral responses that it triggers in people. And so I'm going to walk through the benchmarks that were used to resolve the controversy about tobacco in 1988, which was this landmark moment when the Surgeon General came in and said, yep, cigarettes aren't just a bad habit, they're actually addictive. So I'm going to walk through what those criteria were and then show you how that matches up to what we know about ultra-processed food. So the most important criteria is that it triggers compulsive use. And by this, I mean it's this inability to stop despite a desire to do so or negative consequences. We're clearly seeing that in our food environment where people are gaining weight beyond what they would like to, have diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, want to cut down and they can't. And a lot of people, as a clinical psychologist, they have a lot of distress around their relationship with food and are trying to figure out some sort of way to manage it, but can't. We've tried to get a little closer by taking the core set of questions we ask for every substance to try and decide, is this someone who's maybe just a social drinker? Are they actually starting to show signs of an alcohol addiction? We ask the same questions, whether it's alcohol or cigarettes or heroin. We ask about whether they're experiencing a loss of control, intense cravings, an inability to cut down despite a desire to do so, continued use despite negative consequences, emotional or physical. tolerance, that they kind of start to need more and more and more of the substance or more intense doses to get the same effects. Withdrawal, when they cut down, they can feel irritable, agitated, increased cravings, a little depressed. So we created the Yale Food Addiction Scale, which asks people to think about common ultra-processed foods like your chocolate and your potato chips and your pizzas, and talk about the frequency at which they experience these core signs of addictive behavior. The scale allows you to measure how many symptoms of addiction someone might be experiencing from 0 to 11, and it has a diagnostic threshold. It's the same decision making we use to diagnose someone with alcohol use disorder, which is 2 or more symptoms plus impairment or distress. I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what it's like for someone who's come into my lab who meets this criteria. And they say, I can't even be in the same vicinity as Krispy Kreme or any type of donuts because I will finish a dozen all by myself. And I'm a type 2 diabetic. So that could kill me. And I know that. And I know that I shouldn't be eating all those. I shouldn't be eating one, let alone a whole dozen. But for some reason, I just can't stop eating them. And so as a clinician who's treated somebody, people who've come in with alcohol problems, problems with opiates, problems with tobacco, this resonates as true. Like, I know I shouldn't be smoking. I know this is bad for me. I want to quit and I can't stop. And so this feeling that, even though you want to, it's feeling impossible to quit is really resonant with what we see clinically. So if we look at that diagnosis, what is the potential prevalence of this? So when we look at clinical samples of adults coming in with obesity or diabetes, we see about 1 out of every 3 meet this diagnostic threshold. If we look at just a general community sample, it's about 14%. That's pretty much identical to the prevalence of alcohol addiction. But something that's unique about food is children. We see that children get 70% of their calories from ultra-processed foods. That's what we serve in school lunches. That's the number one thing they have marketed to them. In children, we see in samples of children with overweight, about 1 out of every 5 are already meeting a clinically significant threshold for an addiction to these products. And if we just look at a general community sample of children, it's about 12%. In this, we see that it goes up with someone's weight status. So individuals who have higher overweight or have obesity are more likely to meet this food addiction threshold. What I'm showing you here is that for someone with obesity, it's about 1 out of 3 are meeting the food addiction threshold. For someone who's normal weight, which is that darker bar, it's about 6 to 7%. So still not small, but not as high. We just did a study with the National Poll of Healthy Aging with the University of Michigan, and we found that for women 50 to 64, about 1 out of every 5 was meeting for ultra-processed food addiction. For men, it was about 12%. And what we found was for that group of individuals who had that ultra-processed food addiction, they were, for women, 11 times more likely to have overweight or obesity, and for men, 19 times more likely to have overweight or obesity. So they're more likely to have poor physical, mental health, poor mental health and social isolation. So we're seeing, sometimes I get this kind of snicker of like, oh, come on, it's just a cookie, right? It's just chocolate. But one person's dying every 4 minutes in America due to diet-related disease from ultra-processed food. So this is really causing harm and death on the scale that tobacco has previously. So what foods? I'm kind of trying to demonstrate to you that, yes, there are people who are showing these core signs of addiction and their relationship with food. And we called it food addiction when we first developed the scale because we didn't have good science on, well, what foods is it exactly? And I can tell you that we're getting closer and closer to really being able to identify those culprits. We're taking what we know from addiction science. We know that how you create an addictive drug is you give people an elevated dose beyond what exists in nature. You rapidly deliver it into the system. That's key. That is an underappreciated aspect of what causes addiction is the speed of delivery. If you give somebody a nicotine patch or a nicotine gum, it has more nicotine in it actually than a cigarette, but the way it releases it is low and slow, and it has very low addictive potential. When we look at ultra-processed foods, we're thinking, man, many of these are giving this increased dose of rewarding agents like that sugars and the fats and the carbs. And it's not just that they have sugar and fat, but their food matrix is altered. They've been kind of pre-chewed and pre-digested, if you think about it. I know that's gross, sorry, it's lunch. But think about a banana and you eat it and the amount you have to chew it and break it down and the fiber and the water. You can't just rapidly mainline it into your body and it makes you feel full. No one's like, oh, I just ate a whole bushel of bananas. Like you would feel ill. But think about a bag of potato chips or Oreos. I mean, 3 bites and it's gone. I mean, I just ask you to think about your favorite kind of ultra-processed foods. Just pay attention next time you chew it to how rapidly it dissolves in your mouth compared to like actual real food from Mother Nature. So the food matrix is broken down. So it's essentially like the shot glass equivalent of taking a quick one to get this high dose into the body rapidly. And so this is the least shocking slide I ever show, which is in our studies where we give people a nutritionally diverse set of foods and have them identify what are some of the highest risk foods for them, which ones rise to the top. It's things like chocolate, ice cream, French fries, pizza, cookies, chips, cakes, popcorn, butter, cheeseburgers, muffins. No one is ever like, you're lying to me, chocolate, potato, like how could this be? They're all foods that are rapidly delivering unnaturally high levels of both refined carbohydrates and fats. And that's important too. Real food that Mother Nature gives you either gives you carbohydrate if it's high in something. Lots of them are low in everything. But if you have a high carbohydrate food, like a banana or an orange or some berries, it's totally low in fat. If you have a food that's high in fat, like nuts or meat, they're pretty low in carbohydrate. And so the fact that we are getting both carbohydrate and fat, these reinforcing ingredients that come separate in nature, but combined in the same package really rapidly, is something our brain never really evolved to handle. Okay, what foods are at the bottom of the list? It's foods like apple and salmon and beans. Beans has an aversive experience. No one's binging on beans, I can tell you. So you can see that many of these do have, like apples have sugar in them, salmon has fat in them, but the delivery mechanism matters. It's not giving that combination at such high levels super fast into the body, let alone all the flavor additives and enhancers. So what might this tell us clinically? Like, why do we care, right? I'm going to show you some research about a weight loss treatment trial that happened in California where people were randomized to a low-fat or low-carb diet for weight loss. And they measured all sorts of information about them at the very beginning. And then they did some stepwise logistic regressions to say, we want to pit all of these things in this model. And what is the best predictor of people who fail at this weight loss treatment trial? And what you see, looking at age, education, outcome expectancy, self-control, food addiction was the best predictor of people who were going to drop out of treatment, even though they fought so hard to get into a randomized control trial. That's a lot of work. They were 43% more likely to drop out if they had food addiction at the beginning, even accounting for these other factors. For people who stayed in the trial, but they gained weight rather than lost it, again, food addiction was the best predictor, 46% more likely to gain weight rather than lose weight. So what I'm showing you is this experience of feeling, showing those signs of addiction, that compulsivity to these products has meaningful outcomes for how people are going to respond to our traditional advice of, eat less, just count your calories. It's going to go a lot deeper than that, and our usual stuff is not working. Okay, so the next criteria that was used for cigarettes was this idea that cigarettes would alter your mood and it was impacting the brain. And that's something that was actually really controversial with cigarettes. Cigarettes, you're not high in a way that you are with alcohol or opiates or pot. You can get behind a car and drive it. Back in the 70s or 80s, probably half of you would be smoking right now. That was just what it was like. And so you aren't as mind altered as something like alcohol and opiates, but yet it actually has a higher addictive potential than those other drugs. People have a harder time quitting cigarettes than even things like heroin. So when we look at, are these ultra processed foods, maybe people are just eating them for the calories, But I can tell you what we're seeing in our lab when we do qualitative work is that people are saying, I'm hooked on this for the way it impacts my mood and shifts my emotions. So here's some quotes. For me, the main emotional outcome of the eating is the intense pleasure while it's happening. The emotional thing is big for me. I definitely eat this stuff to feel better. And this is, again, how I'm showing that the industry knows this. I read their trade magazines, and they are like all about targeting people to be like, our products are not just for calories, they're to alter your emotions. So this is a little advertisement that popped up on my husband's phone, and it was emotional support fries, and he's from San Francisco. So like the one above it is like, can San Francisco be devastated by wildfires? Let's freak you out. Hey, you need some emotional support fries? $1.49. So it's just the idea that this isn't about nourishing the body or getting energy to thrive, but instead about altering one's mood is quite clear in the business model. So what about a closer idea? So with tobacco, one of the ways that it was demonstrated that it was psychoactive, it was mood altering, was by using this euphoria scale of the Addiction Research Center inventory. And so in this, they would give people, intravenously delivered nicotine straight into the veins. And people would give that a rating. These are smokers, a score of about 6 on how much euphoria it gave them out of 10. In contrast, if you give people who are eating white chocolate or milk chocolate, they actually rate it higher than intravenously delivered nicotine. So people on that exact same scale, this was work done by the USDA. So when people are thinking about those kind of, ability to kind of shift that mood in positive ways, using the exact same measure, some of our most appealing ultra-processed foods clearly are kind of tapping into that same network. And this isn't surprising when we look at the brain. This is a graph developed by my colleague Alex DeFelice-Antonio and Dana Small, and it's mapping that pathway from your gut to your brain. And so you have all these different layers of your brain talking to your tongue and talking to your tummy. So the moment you touch it, it touches your tongue, there's an immediate hit from those oral sensory nerves in your nose and in your mouth straight up to that reward center of the brain, the striatal area of the brain that all addictive drugs converge on. And then when you start to absorb it into your gut and your blood glucose rises and your lipid levels rise in the blood, that goes and through those metabolic signatures gives a second hit into the dopamine system of the brain. And we're seeing a lot of this from the GLP-1 agonists, the Wegovy, the Ozempic, all those addictive, the new weight loss medications that are in the news all the time. They seem to be working by actually turning down the volume, the sensitivity of this part of the brain that triggers dopamine. This dopamine center of the brain, it seems to be turning down the volume on that a little bit. So people are less hooked by these, specifically the ultra processed foods. Surprisingly, they're seeing that people are also losing their desire to drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, even use opiates. And because all these drugs and these ultra-processed foods are converging on the same neural circuitry, this med seems to be having addiction effects as well. So that's being studied. But I get people, okay, great, it's hitting the same brain region. You're ending up in that kind of lizard brain, that limbic system that's about desire and reward. It was designed to care about food. I mean, is this really on the same par as what you see with addictive drugs? And the answer is no, not if you look at something like cocaine and methamphetamines. They will blow up the dopamine system in your brain, 1,000 times over baseline. But addictive drugs like nicotine and alcohol are actually far more subtle. So I'm showing you here microdialysis charts of measuring the amount of dopamine that spikes in that lizard brain in response to nicotine and alcohol. And it's about 150 to 200% above baseline. What I'm showing you now is that same microdialysis, but with sugar or with ultra-processed foods that have both carbohydrates and fats. And you can see it spikes dopamine release at about 150 to 200% above baseline, very similar to what you see with ethanol and alcohol. I just saw a recent study that essentially looked at a milkshake in rats, high in liquid delivery of sugar and fat, and it's at over 300% dopamine release above baseline, so surpassing that you see with nicotine and ethanol. So same brain regions, same kind of core addiction neurotransmitter at the same level. The next question that was used to resolve the controversy about cigarettes was, is it highly reinforcing? And by that, that means, will people work to get it? Will an animal self-administer it? Will you sit there and press a lever? Will you drive 40 minutes to go to your favorite, donut shop? Is it reinforcing? Does it motivate behavior? And a core way that this was shown with nicotine is they took a known reinforcer, cocaine, and they took a rat and said, you got to choose, buddy. You get a nicotine lever over here or cocaine over here. Which one you choosing? And about 20% of the time, the rats would choose nicotine over cocaine. And they're saying, oh, look, it can battle with cocaine. It has compelling reinforcing properties. I want to show you what they see when they do that same setup with sweet taste. In this, the lever S is the sweet taste lever. The lever C is the cocaine lever. 80% of the times, the rats will choose the sweet taste lever over a cocaine lever. This has also been demonstrated with opiates. This has also been demonstrated for rats who are showing signs of dependence on the cocaine and the opiates. What you can see in that figure C is each rat mapped in whether they were a cocaine preferer or a sweet preferer. And you can see only one little rat out there preferred the cocaine. Everyone else was at the sweetness, was at the like Dairy Queen, right? And then there's one rat who really liked to party, and they just go back and forth, cocaine, back and forth, back and forth. So this has now been seen time and time again. Our biopsychology department at the University of Michigan is fantastic. I go to their talks all the time, and many they really will just find that those rats will choose those sweet banana pellets and sugar pellets over their drugs more often than not. And of course they would, because that's what evolution set our brain to care about. So when we start to turn up the volume on food reward, which is what we're already baked to want, and we start amplifying it, we don't have to work that hard. The brain wasn't evolved to care about getting nicotine. It really is like you really have to make that perfect for the animal to care about that over what it's designed to want, which is really intense food reward. So what's the lived experience of someone who's really struggling with this? This was someone else in my lab for a qualitative study. And they would say, I do it all the time, but just one example is I went to the mall, which is 30 or 40 minutes away from my house, just to get a Cinnabon. And I got extra sauce on it. And if I have other foods in the house, I might get my fruits and veggies in there, but I'll still go to the store and get the Reese's peanut butter cups and the Doritos and 2 or 3 pops. And this person both had severe food addiction, but also very low food security. So they didn't have enough money to feed themselves in any given month. And having the fruits and the veggies that maybe are being subsidized or given away to encourage that is having a hard time competing with that drive and desire to get the Doritos and the donuts. And I'm sure this person didn't have the time or the money perhaps to drive 40 minutes away. So it really speaks to some of the challenges of trying to improve our food environment if the signal and the desire and the hooking of the ultra processed products, which are also the most convenient and marketed and accessible and cheap, just has such an ability to pull the motivational drive away from the fruits and the vegetables and the high quality proteins. So another criteria that wasn't in the Surgeon General's report but has been recommended based on addiction science is that it triggers strong urges and cravings. And I think we all have had the experience of having a strong craving at some point in our life for an ultra-processed food. We know this exists. The industry often uses craving as a marketing strategy. Craving meet your maker. There's a children's cereal that I just despise. It is so nutritionally poor, and it's called Crave. It's just like that's the name of it. We're just saying it. And then we're like, maybe your stuff's addictive. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, eat Crave. So this is some study about, again, we understand that craving is a big part. This is work from Hetty Kober at Yale, where she did brain mapping of people looking at a drug they were addicted to and looking at those cues and experiencing cravings, and people looking at really highly appealing ultra-processed food. And what she found was that the neural map of craving for addictive drugs and rewarding food is overlapping. You cannot distinguish it. So it's regions like the supplementary motor area, the ventral striatum, that dopamine sort of system, ventral medial prefrontal cortex associated with value. So it's really getting in and using that same circuitry to drive that increased desire for both. And this is some data that just shows the consequences of that. Again, people are like, craving, like really how bad can this be? This is also from Hetty, and she did this big meta-analysis and found that no matter how you organize the craving and thought about it, and it was a really good predictor of people's tendency to fail at their eating goals or their weight loss goals. So if we're just saying, eat this, not that, count your calories, and we're not acknowledging the emotional aspect, the craving aspect, we're really missing a big part of the puzzle and helping people do better. So those are the Surgeon General criteria that was used to say tobacco is addictive. And I would argue that there is scientific evidence that is strong to suggest that many of the most amped up ultra processed foods in our environment can hit all of those levers. And I just keep thinking about for myself, like, what is the evidence that these things wouldn't be addictive, right? We are wired for food reward. Our body cares deeply about it. And now we've let an industry that created tobacco pull every single of the same levers of optimizing dose and increasing speed and amplifying it with all these sensory additives and making it flooding the market. So it's everywhere. Cake used to be for birthday parties, and now it's at like when I check out of Staples because I need printer paper, it's like a whole array of cake. Like, why is there cake here? Like, it's just so different and distinct. And so, like, why would we think somehow we would be vulnerable to the addictive nature if we mess with this with food reward? So it's, we see these products are contributing to hundreds of thousands of preventable deaths every year, surpassing alcohol on par with tobacco. People consume it compulsively, crave intensely, trigger dopamine release in the same magnitude as nicotine and ethanol, highly reinforcing. And there's over 400 empirical articles on an addiction to ultra-processed food. So what the heck should we do about it? I hope I freaked you out. Everyone's like, oh no, nah. There are things to do. I think one of the things that I think is so powerful and good is that we already have the solution, which is real food. With opiates, we've had this big struggle of how do we create an opiate that's effective at pain relief that doesn't also trigger that addictive response, right? We're still working to develop that. We already have what Mother Nature has given us and that humans have optimized themselves on for thousands and thousands of years. And that all nutritionists agree, like a diet that's composed mostly of things like fruits and vegetables and intact whole grains, not the whole grain on an ultra processed food box. There's so much health washing. They put so many claims on these boxes that are totally unwarranted. That's very poorly regulated, the health claims that they can put on all of that. Don't trust it. If it's telling you it's high in protein, unless it's like a meat or some nuts or Greek yogurt, like look at it sideways. So the thing is, real food that you would recognize from your youth that is pretty close to what came from Mother Nature, that should really be the foundation of the diet to nourish us, both from a mental, we're seeing strong evidence in my lab that these foods also contribute to depression and anxiety. They inflame the body. They lead you to have all these spikes and crashes. They often lead people to have a blood glucose plummet in the middle of the night. A lot of people eat their, ultra processed carby foods right before bed and then wake up at like 3 a.m. and having like intense cravings and find themselves in the refrigerator. So like these sorts of things can impact so many domains of your life. I really would love to see policy that makes the foundation, what's convenient, what's easy, what's accessible, what's affordable to all of us for the default to be real food. There's regulation being considered right now to actually define ultra-processed food from a regulatory capacity to be able to start to kind of label those, front of pack labels. I just testified for a bill that was passed with bipartisan support in California to get the most high-risk ultra-processed foods out of the school lunch supply. So there's just really common sense things that we can do to start to improve the food environment. Legislation is happening all over where certain of the most unnecessary food additives that are just being used to amplify this reward signal more, like Red 40, things like that, they're being restricted from the food supply. Bipartisan, West Virginia, California, like it is Utah, like there's over 100 bills going on right now at state level to change this. Litigation is probably one of the tools. The master settlement by the Attorney General was huge for tobacco. The industry is able to keep all of the things they're doing to design these products behind lock and key. We really don't know. We just kind of have to trust them. And the federal approach at the FDA to certify new food additives is fundamentally broken. It's called the grass loophole. A industry can say, we promise this product is safe, provide no data. It's called self-affirmation. It was designed so things like flour and salt didn't have to go through FDA regulatory capacity. Over 1,000 new food additives have entered our food supply without any FDA oversight. So there's movement to try and shut that loophole. I want to suggest to people that, again, I can find people get obsessed and it's exhausting to count every calorie or count every macro. We see that when people are eating real, more minimally processed or traditionally processed foods, their nutritional wisdom comes back. They can listen to their hunger and satiety signals. If you take that same person and you put them in an ultra-processed food environment, Kevin Hall did this at National Institute of Health, that same person in the ultra-processed food environment has access to the same amount of calories, same overall macronutrient distribution, eats 500 more calories a day without even noticing it. It doesn't hit hunger and satiety signals in the same way. It gets dysregulated. And that's by design. You'll eat more. So trust real food and try and make that the foundation of your diet. The goal is not for that to be perfect. This is not your worth as a person, is whether you had a cookie. Eat a cookie, go for it. But it shouldn't be the majority of how you're trying to nourish your body. Hunger is something I talk to people a lot about. I often see when people are trying to eat differently, they go on diets where they're really trying to restrict their calories, but they're still eating ultra-processed food, maybe the slightly more reformulated version with a little bit more artificial sweeteners, which triggers your brain really intensely too. And they're miserable. They're hungry and they have these intense cravings. There's evidence that a study just came out from Britain that they took people and they put them on either healthier ultra-processed foods or on real food, minimally processed food, and people lost double the weight on real food and almost all body fat rather than muscle. So don't get yourself really, really hungry. The hunger hormones in your gut go up to that dopamine addiction center and tells you, you need this. Pay attention. More dopamine release when you see a cue that tells me that calories available. So I suggest to people, eat regularly, 3 meals, 1 or 2 snacks. Try and feel satisfied and nourished, but focus on the quality of the diet. And that will make you less vulnerable to when, you have the cookie or you want something different. Knowing your triggers is giving yourself agency. So we'll have people monitor their cues and do journaling, where it's like there's usually certain places, certain people, certain times of day, McDonald's that you drive by on your way home from work, the donuts that you walk by or they bring to the 8 a.m. meeting. Nobody brings little alcohol liquor bottles to the 8 a.m. meeting. You just got to be in this constant state of vigilance if you're trying to alter this in this food environment. Knowing what your triggers are and developing ways, especially if they're emotional, we see depression, anxiety, trauma are all really big factors that can make people more vulnerable to the emotionally altering pieces of these foods. So finding ways to regulate your emotions, take care of yourself, give yourself pleasure that doesn't have this addictive signature can be really important work. And then there's this, the medication revolution of Wegovy and Ozempic is, we can't put everybody on it or it will bankrupt us. And it's wildly effective for many people in a way that has been shocking to the entire community. I don't think anybody saw this coming and the magnitude that it is. So this remains to be seen how it fits in there. But we would give people medication for cancer, for heart disease, for addictions. There's medication. It seems like if we have a really effective tool in our tool belt to say, no, you just have to white knuckle it out, feels cruel given the amount of distress and death that we're seeing around these ultra-processed foods. But as we've learned from tobacco, the most effective thing is to go upstream, to ask for corporate responsibility so it's not hijacking our personal responsibility, and to set up an environment that the default is health rather than temptation. So thank you so much. Gonna thank some of the grants I have and some of my collaborators that I talked about here. I do have a little simulated fast food restaurant because the cues are so important. So we make French fries and milkshakes and cheeseburgers and look at how brain responses predict what people do in that environment, which I could not have done without the support of the University of Michigan. I'm incredibly grateful to them. All my colleagues are really jealous of my simulated fast food restaurant lab. So go blue, and I'm happy to take questions. Thanks.
Again, raise your hand so our live streaming people can hear the question as well. We'll start over here. Jim, you got I see one over there.
One word I did not hear at all in your presentation is caffeine.
Yes.
Where does that fit in this, or does it?
Oh, that's absolutely. So caffeine is a really great factor to talk about. Caffeine is a really interesting substance. Caffeine on its own, it doesn't seem to have the dopamine signal that these other addictive drugs do. Caffeine plus sugar, on the other hand, or sweetener, is going to enhance the tolerance and withdrawal effects. You will become tolerant for caffeine. You will crave caffeine due to the way it alters your physiological state. If you quit it, you will go through withdrawal. The good news is I drink a lot of caffeine. So I'm like trying to say this might be self-indulgent here, but that there is evidence that there's lots of ways to get caffeine that actually has antioxidant properties. Coffees, green teas, that delivery mechanism matters. I really highlight to people energy drinks, those really sweet drinks it's more the sugar and the sweetener that to me has the greater health impact per se than if you were drinking some green tea or a coffee with a little bit of half and half. I think of it as kind of like a menthol, like it was cigarettes. It really amplifies the reward signature of that. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking. Or I don't know how you guys if you want me to just call people or yeah.
So what is the definition of an ultra-processed food?
Ooh, good question. Man, I've been doing nothing but fighting with scientists. Right? No, we're all in a tizzy over the request for information from the FDA. This was first defined actually the year after we put out the Food Addiction Scale by Dr. Carlos Monteiro at Brazil. That's the NOVA system is the most commonly used approach for ultra-processed food. And what Carlos has it pulled into 4 categories. There's minimally processed foods, your fruits, your veggies, something that's just been cut up or canned. There's culinary ingredients, processed culinary ingredients, sugars, fats, flours. Then there's processed foods. It still has like an intact whole matrix, but there's been some sort of additive to it. So for that, you might think of baked beans with like sodium or fruit in a syrup. But then you get to the ultra-processed foods, and these are foods how they're generally defined as foods that are industrially made. They have industrial agents in them that are not used by a home cook, the emulsifiers, the color additives. It's actually agnostic about nutrition information, except for it says it has like no whole food left in it. You can't look at a Snicker and be like, I see the corn in that. It's so restricted out of its food matrix that there is no whole food left in it. And there are some ultra processed foods that don't seem to have a rough health signature. Certain whole wheat breads, certain yogurts may not be, plant-based meats might not be as problematic. But fundamentally, the most commonly consumed ultra-processed foods are those high in those carbohydrates and fats and salts. And they're the biggest source of those nutrient-poor agents in there. So when I think of it myself, when I look at the back of a label, I actually don't pay that much attention to the nutrition information per se. I look at the ingredient list. And if there's ingredients in there that I have no idea what in the heck it is, and it's as long as my arm, I think of it as probably an ultra-processed food. And the more opportunity there are to pull those levers, the more opportunity there is for hedonic engineering. And again, the industry doesn't have to disclose any of that, so we really don't know what or why or how they're doing it. If you're interested in this, the book Ultra Processed People by Chris Van Tulleken is excellent. It's some of the best science writing I've read. Phenomenal. And there's an app called Yuka, Yuka, and it's a bar scanner. You can scan something at the grocery and it will tell you it's like the nutritional concerns and the additives of concern and suggest less problematic alternatives. So there are things coming out that are going to help people sort this out. But common sense, if it isn't a food that like you can recognize its natural form, like feel more and more skeptical that it's probably ultra processed.
Does sleep patterns, tiredness, how does that interact with food addiction and ultra processed
So
foods?
hard. Yeah, excellent question. Stress and sleep are huge here. So what we see in general is that when people are really tired, their neural response to ultra processed, high calorie food cues is amplified. And again, a lot of this is our nutritional wisdom being used against us in the modern world. Like if you were really tired, getting more fast energy into your body, if you're like living out in the jungle, like that's great. That's really helpful. In a modern world where we're all exhausted and we're drinking too much caffeine probably, and we're on our phones scrolling, social media till 1 a.m, that there is this chronic fatigue in our society. And so when you are tired, your brain is more vulnerable to those cues. Again, it's supposed to be a compassionate, functional response, but it's just been triggered incorrectly in the modern world. Also, we can see it the other way. If you are eating, especially a lot of high carbohydrate, ultra processed foods right before bed, or different times, the blood sugar spikes and crashes that you're experiencing can happen in the middle of the night. We see a lot of people who report night eating or night binging as well, waking up in the middle of the night and because they're just having cravings and eating, and that can disrupt your sleep. So again, like thinking about especially people with alcohol can help you fall asleep, but then it doesn't help you stay asleep. I think of that a lot. People will eat some of these foods for comfort or relaxation to kind of calm down at the end of the day, but then it doesn't help you stay asleep. And so if you are hungry or want food, make sure you're getting like a real food with high levels of protein and fiber, which will like sustain you, nourish bedtime if you're hungry and you want a snack. Totally a vicious cycle. Stress does the same thing. If you're not sleeping well, you're stressed. Often if you're stressed, you're not sleeping well. The stress hormones in our body also potentiate that dopamine system and make it more reactive to addictive cues. So stress, sleep, all of those things play a role and make us more vulnerable to this. To me, it's such a symptom of modern life, right? Like we are in a mismatch between what our brains evolved to do and what modern life looks like. And so I think I have a lot of compassion for all of us that we're just swimming in the sea of things that aren't nourishing us, but are kind of things that make a lot of people a lot of money and take the edge off maybe for a second, but actually don't set us up to be well.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I was recently at a child's birthday party, and I noticed the eldest person there was 93,
Uh-huh.
and the youngest person was 18 months.
Uh-huh.
And what really struck me, and there were age groups of 70, 30
Yeah.
kids, and as you went from the oldest person at 93 downward, the weight
Yeah, absolutely.
started to and especially in the group probably in their 30s,
Mm-hmm.
I would say every single individual there was very much overweight,
Mm.
and their kids, including my grandkids, were there, were also very much overweight.
Yeah.
So, and I think the big problem is like they're eating Pop-Tarts
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So I think you have a terrific presentation and a great message. How do you get the message out to that generation? Because they're going to be the people that
Totally.
will eventually be older and less healthy than we are now.
Yeah, it has been astronomical to see. So children are actually shorter than they used to be too, because despite getting a lot of calories, they're not getting nourished. So we're seeing the average height start to shrink. Things like type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes, not anymore. non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is essentially like typically what we see from heavy years of alcohol. We're seeing it now in millions of children. So I don't think we have a choice. I think we're trying to work on, anybody remember the Truth Campaign for tobacco? So there were some really concerted public opinion polls or public messaging with tobacco, and it focused a lot on the industry and then gave people tools that they could use right now. I find often when I talk to people about this, they'll leave here being like, oh crap, but 70% of the grocery store is ultra processed. And especially if you don't have a lot of money and a lot of time. I mean, I have 2 little kids, I'm stupidly time poor. And so we have to incentivize strategies and give people tools that when they hear this message about your food environment brought to you by big tobacco and we're dying, right? We're just dying, is here are the Yucca app. Here is I use Small Potatoes Catering is like my hack for how my family eats healthier. It is a local company that delivers scratch-made meals on Mondays to my house, and they're delicious. We have to meet people where they are. I think I didn't grow up learning how to cook. My mom didn't cook. So I don't really, we have to meet people by subsidizing. So I think the reality of what we're facing and providing people with tools compassionately to help come out, I'm hoping we'll get there, but it's probably going to take some time, unfortunately. I think it is shifting.
Hi. I always think of consumer behavior from the standpoint of both cost and convenience.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that fast food, particularly
Yeah.
ultra processed, kind of meets both those
Totally.
measures.
1000%.
I mean, I wonder if your Fast Lab would do better if it had a drive-through window.
Yeah, totally. It totally would.
It seems to me that a calorie is cheaper in a fast food or
Totally right.
ultra processed than it is otherwise, and that low-income people tend to be
Totally.
driven that way. If you add convenience to that, is it any wonder we're in the shape we're in?
No, not at all. I mean, that's the compassionate message, but that's a design by policy. I mean, what we subsidize, who we give tax breaks to, the farm bill. I grew up on a farm. I didn't have a single thing on my farm I could eat. Everything was corn to go into high fructose corn syrup, soy to go into soybean oil. And my dad wasn't doing that because he didn't care. That's what the agricultural bill incentivized to grow. And so I look at other countries where this has not always been this way. I mean, this is a modern problem that started in World War II when food technology advanced, but really the gasoline was poured on the fire in the 80s. So this is a new problem. And I think if we were brave and courageous about using some policy levers to incentivize the right things and creative, I absolutely think we could do it.
I read somewhere
Yeah.
that some massive 20% of meals in this country are delivered through drive-through windows. Is that
That resonates. I'm almost surprised it's low. And now that's without the delivery apps, right? Grubhub and DoorDash, all those
in your
things.
cars?
Exactly.
They design now food delivery systems that will fit in your cup holder.
And
you can
only
dump
two,
it in
that's
your
right,
mouth
only
while
one
you're-
hand,
while
that you
you're
only
driving.
need one hand. That's exactly right. So this is by design. It is by design. This is not destiny. This is not how humans have generally lived. This is the effective policy. And so we have levers out, and we have other countries that are not ill like we are. And it's going to bankrupt us. So we don't really have a choice.
All right, might have 2 more questions.
So this is sort of a follow-up on what you were just
Sure.
saying. How optimistic are you that we're going to see significant changes based on what's going on with supportive research and
Yeah.
with other decisions that are being made about health?
That's a hard one, tactfully, especially the live stream. In many ways, I actually, in my specific domain of science, feel actually a little bit more optimistic than I ever have, because many of the messages around the food Michelle Obama was saying, and my advisor was really, his name's Kelly Brownell, was very active in that time period, and it was such a partisan issue that it got attacked. I was stunned when that anti-ultra-processed food school lunch bill that was introduced by Jesse Gabriel, who's a Democrat in California, passed 36-1, total bipartisan support. So I keep saying, like, there's this vibe where sometimes my 4-year-old will tantrum and he'll block the door, and then he'll suddenly be over it and he'll get up and open the door and be like, "You're welcome." And I'm like, "But you were blocking the door. You were blocking the door." So I feel a little bit like it's great to not feel blocked on this, and for it to not be that. The support of science and valuing science is the answer. How that'll work out's concerning. So I feel optimism and threat, but there's too many people losing too much money. If you're a small business owner and you're paying for people's insurance, it's not feasible. So I think there's a lot of rich people who are suffering, and I think that unfortunately might motivate things, just to be quite blunt.
I'm tempted to ask for a bag of cash to give this up for the last question, but
thank you for this very enlightening talk. I have heard that with the advent of Wegovy and Ozempic, that the snack industry is in panic mode.
So true.
Is that an anecdotal?
No, it's fully true. I'll tell you my favorite thing I do to procrastinate. It is, don't tell Michigan. Actually, I'll turn it into a paper. It'll be fine. They have a newsletter called the Food Navigator, and it's a trade industry newsletter. Anybody can sign up for it. I read their reactions to GLP-1s and the complete panic, and I take them and I save them and I take the worst quotes. Things that have come out is saying, well, indulgence has been our main profit engine. We have to figure out how to turn cravings into corporate profits for people who are on Wegovy, who suddenly just want to actually eat fruit and vegetables. This is horrible. We are a volume-based business. And so I am just taking quote after quote after quote, because when I'm critical of the food industry, they'll say, hey, we're just trying to feed Americans, right? We're trying to give them convenient, safe food. And I'm saying, no, we have a medicine that is a once in a generation medicine. It's actually a tool for people. And your response is, how do we engineer products so it's less effective for people, and get around the effectiveness of this medicine, or use it as a health halo frame to suggest they call it functional indulgence products, which is like a low sugar, high protein donut. I'm like,
it's an oxymoron.
Right? So, yes, they're absolutely panicking. And there's a pill version coming out that'll probably be on the market very soon. It's been the best entryway into how they really feel and really what their playbook is.
Do you think that they will come up with something that will make it less effective? I have to say I'm a proud, winner of Wegovy.
It's a miracle.
Life. It really is. And the food noise is the thing that it really turns off.
Yep.
But I'm just wondering, is there something that turns it back on?
They're trying. I will tell you they're trying.
Okay.
So again, minimally, don't trust. They have GLP-1 friendly ultra processed foods. Treat that with skepticism.
Okay.
They're trying to do it through texture. So, and flavor additives and chewiness and hitting the side effects too. So just be very wary. They are trying. I promise you they're trying.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you very, very much. A great opening talk for our first meeting of the year, I guess, for us. So again, we have about a 10-minute break here before the next speaker, who will start promptly at 2.